While they get my slides on, a very good morning to all the attendees in the room. I'm glad to be here, and I'm. The good news is I'm just gonna continue from the previous speaker and add clarity to what he has presented previously. He talked about the art of manuscript publishing, the art of preparing a manuscript, and I'm gonna give a bit more clarity on the peer review process. So everybody asks you to publish. It's like sending you to a maze without a map. So I hope to provide you a map for that maze. So the aim of my session is to provide a comprehensive guide for those who seek to navigate, to publish, like to navigate the intricate process of sharing their research with the global scientific community. In layman term, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you in layman term, how do you have now prepared a paper, and that paper needs to be published. And my role here is to tell you what is the process, where do I start, what to expect, how long, what do I do, how not to make the editors unhappy and cause desk rejection. Next slide, please. Okay. So, the previous speaker also talked about it's wasteful for you scientists as scientists to do research in the lab and not publish. It's also not true that we only create knowledge in the lab. We don't. We also create knowledge by publishing. So when you publish, why do you publish? That's the first time you're actually telling people what you do. And that's the first time people from the world can actually evaluate what you're doing. They can repeat your experiments and they can evaluate the intellectual process. So this is why you need to publish, and it leads to. Can you go to the previous slide, please? Previous slide, please. Okay. Yeah. This is what I was trying to say. Why we publish? We publish because this is how we build the body of knowledge. We don't just build the body of knowledge in the lab. We build the body of knowledge through publication. We want to disseminate new information. Only when you tell people, then you invite feedback. People get to know what you're doing. They may write to you and say, Dr. Renukha, have you thought about this? Prof. Balakumar, have you thought about this? That's how you create knowledge. And then establish you as a member of the community. Then you get to known as a researcher who talk about medication safety in older people, for example. So, the primary aim of publishing is to communicate. You want to tell people why your research is important, but it must be first disclosure, first time people are reading it, and hence it's unique. But then you also have that paper must have enough information so that people can know what did you do, what did you observe, and if they want, they can actually repeat the experiment and evaluate your intellectual process. And when I say intellectual process, it's not just methodology in the lab. It's about how you talked about the objective, how you did the methods, and how you presented the result and arrived in the discussion. So that's the intellectual process that we want to see. Okay? So that's just introduction. But when we say publication, we are not just talking about, next slide please. We are not just talking about publication of original research. We know that what Prof. Balakumar mentioned earlier is about structuring an original research which has an abstract, introduction, methods, result, discussion, means an original research done by you as a researcher. But we also publish other articles such as protocols or methods and procedure, case series, case reports, literature review, systematic review, meta-analysis. All of these papers have got its main point, main purpose. You want to tell the reader something. So, but then why do I put up this? Because when you go to the publication journal website, you will see the instruction of authors will say that if it's an original article, do this. If it's a review, do this. So you must know what you're writing. Hence, I've put this up to tell you that know what you're writing. Know that you're writing with a purpose. You want to tell people something, have that main point, and write according to that. Now, before, now you have a paper, let's assume that we've got an original research, because we have been talking about original research since morning. We talked about research planning, and then we talk about data analysis, and then we talk about manuscript writing. It was all original research. So let's just assume we've got an original research that we're going to publish. Who should be the author? This is always a taboo, and I think it's very important that you address it very early on. Who should be an author? An author is someone who contributed substantially to the work by doing all three of these following. Must be all three. He or she must have contributed to the conception, design, acquisition of the data, or analysis and interpretation of the data, i.e. the person who was involved in designing and conducting the study, drafting the article, and final approval of the version to be published. So that is the person who is eligible to be the author. And nowadays, many journals will ask you to disclose and say, if you have 10 authors in that paper, disclose what did each author contribute to the paper. Previous slide, please. In what order? So now, if you have 7 authors and you have said, okay, all 7 authors did the conception, did the write-up, and also did the final approval. Now, who, in what order? So, it is the order of importance of the experiment or work they contributed. So, the first author is always the person who did most of the experiment and writing. That's the first author. The last author is typically the principal investigator of a grant or principal supervisor of the student. And the corresponding author should either be the first author or principal supervisor, but it is just not namesake. This corresponding author has got a very huge responsibility, and only name the person if you think that person can do those 3 things. Must be contactable in case of further queries, must be familiar with the study, and have access to the primary data. When you read papers, any journal article, let's say you have any doubt, the only way of you clarifying that doubt is writing to the corresponding author. And if the corresponding author not contactable, changes institution every 6 months, then there's no point. If the corresponding author was not involved in the whole study and don't know what's happening, also no point. So you must name a person who can actually do all that 3. It's a huge responsibility. Now, that's all the intro. So now is the crust of things. Although it's going to overlap with a little bit of what Prof. Balakumar has mentioned, but I'll try to explain a bit more within the time limit. So, where to publish? I find this very helpful. If the person, technical person, if you can just click on Jane, the second link, that would be very helpful. I think we have time. No. Previous slide. Next. Can you click on that link? That Jane Biosemantics. That should bring us to a website. I want everybody to see this. Okay, never mind, it's okay. So if you're not able to do so, that's fine. What I'm trying to put up here, these are some examples of journal selection sites. If you remember the previous speaker, he also mentioned that you need to select the right journal. You need to make sure that your paper fits a journal scope. So this is how you do it. But then instead of manually doing it, we also have in this era, obviously we've got a lot of tools. These are some examples that I like to use. The EDANS, Journal Selector, or the Jane Biosemantics. When you click on this link or you Google and you go to this link, what it will do is, it will simply ask you to put in the abstract of the paper that you have written. Just cut and paste that abstract there and say, show journals. It will give you a list of journals that it has matched with the words in your abstract. It's just basic keyword matching. Words in your abstract with the keywords of that papers that appear in that journal and match in terms of scope. Now your first step is done. All you need to do is, you probably have like 10 suggestions from that paper. You go to that 10 suggestion, click one by one and see all those things that we have mentioned just now. Look at the journal website, whether the scope meets your own scope. What does scope means? I know there are some students here, these are not for seasoned lecturers. I think seasoned academics, you know what I'm talking about. But for students, what does journal scope means? When you go to any journal website, we mentioned pharmacological research this morning. If you just look at pharmacological research, aim and scope, it will say that this journal aims to, the journal readers are those kind of statements. Then you critically think whether my paper is fitted to this audience or not. That's how we match journal scope. So this journal selection site will help you to do the first screening. After that, you need to screen and see. Next slide, please. Based on each of the thing that give you, you see whether the suggestion fits the suggestion given and your manuscript fits the journal scope. You also want to look at acceptance rate. Maybe you have 3 journals suggested by those journal finders, and then the acceptance rates of the first journal is 30%, the other one is 1%, the other one is 14%. You probably want to try the 30% first, so that it has a higher acceptance rate, provided it's also in Web of Science and Q1, Q2 as the quality that you are looking at. You also want to look at whether there's open access or subscription based. We are all novice researchers. We are also not very rich. So you have funding opportunity and you can pay that amount, I don't know how much is it in Indian ringgit, but I know it can cost up to USD 4,000 for open access, which is really very expensive. So if you don't have that kind of fund, don't think that only open access is good. Subscription base is also fine. Of course, the reach is better in open access, but we have to work within our means. So if you don't have the fund, then you can try for subscription base. But if you have funding, then you can go for open access. So all these things you need to be very aware when you select the journals. Don't go and submit everything and then they finish all the peer review and you say, I don't have no money to publish. Okay. So you need to know how much they charge for publication and reputation. We talked about reputation quite a bit previously, so I'm not going to touch it. I think the next speaker is so going to touch it. You don't want to publish in journals that doesn't have good reputation, whether in a field or as a whole in general. Okay. Now, so you had a manuscript, you had an abstract that checked through the journal selection site, you had a couple of suggestions, you went and look at each of the suggestions and see whether in terms of scope, acceptance rate, the payment you have, open access, the reputation, all that, then you've selected one journal. Now, you're ready for submission. Remember, you had a couple of authors. Send the full draft of your manuscript to all your authors, invite their feedback, get their consent. When you submit, all the authors will typically receive an email and say that you have named as a co-author for this submission. If you have any objection, please let us know. You don't want to get a desk rejection because your co-author was not aware and go and say that, no, it was not me. Okay? Okay. Now you're ready. How do I submit? You know you have identified the journal now, right? So you go to the journal site, register for an account, and the most important Bible that you have to study overnight, like what Prof. Balakumar mentioned, is the instruction to authors. Treat the instruction to authors like a sacred document. It is really a sacred document because you don't want to make... They say first impression matters, right? It definitely matters in manuscript submission. You want to submit a beautiful, clean, nicely formatted copy up to their expectation. And the only reason why they're going to say no is if the reviewer comment came back negatively. Otherwise, there should not be a rejection. Okay, that should be your first target. So look at the instruction of the authors. Here, they will tell you if it's an original article, how much is the word count. Do not exceed even with 1 word. what kind of abstract is it? Is it structured, unstructured? In the methodology, sometimes they even say it's not introduction, it's background. Then you change your methodology as background. Don't go and say, no, my supervisors say introduction. But your supervisor is not going to publish that paper. The journal is going to publish your paper. So follow their instruction. If they say put it as materials and methods, you name that section as materials and methods. If they say methodology, change it to methodology. Okay? If they say write the discussion and results, put them together. If they say separate the discussion and result, then separate them. Follow it exactly. It's really a Bible that you need to follow. It's not easy, I believe, but treat it as a checklist and do one by one. The reference format, where to put the reference. Is it put it at the end of the sentence, before the full stop, after the full stop? Even these kind of nitty-gritty things really make them unhappy, so don't do it. So this is how, since we talk about nature, I thought I'll take about vaccine. So this is how the first page of a journal should look like. But typically they will ask you to register. You need to first register an account. And then once you have registered and you have entered the full website, the first Bible, go get the instruction for authors. Study the instruction of authors. Format your manuscript according to the instruction to the authors. And then you are ready to submit. It is also in that document they will tell you where to put the figure, where to put the legend, how to name the figure, how to name the table. All those details will be there. What to include in a submission? Cover letter. Prof. Balakumar also mentioned about cover letter already. So it must include corresponding author address, email and phone number. I'll show an example shortly. Obviously, you need to include an electronic copy of your article in your submission. There's no way you can submit without the article. An email address of all authors. Next slide, please. Okay. In the instruction to authors, they also usually have this kind of submission checklist. This is a sample. Okay, I can't remember which journal I took it from, but this is just a sample. So again, it's another checklist. Make sure you have all this included in wherever they ask you to include. For example, ensure that following items are present. One author has been designated as the corresponding author with contact details. Remember, this person has got full responsibility of the paper. All files have been uploaded and contained. You have given the keywords, you have given the figure captions, the tables, and you have done spell check and grammar check, references and the format that was prescribed by this journal, and you have, all those things. So just have to make sure that you have done all that before you submit, because it's a submission checklist. Now, a bit of clarity on the cover letter. Don't write a long letter like what Prof mentioned previously. We want to be crisp and clear. The cover letter has got 3 things that you want to do mainly. What is your main point on that paper? Remember, I told you papers can have multiple format, original research, review, etc., etc. Every paper has got a main point. What is the main point of that paper? And state why is that work important and whether it's not, and it should not be published elsewhere. So clarify that and mention who will be the corresponding author. You can suggest the names of possible reviewers. Some journals actually require you to do that, and that's where you do it in the cover letter. And in fact, if you think that some reviewers should not be considered, you can also include that. But I usually don't do that. I think that let that be to the editor to decide. So at the minimum, please state what's your main point. Why is it important? State the work that is novel, not published elsewhere, and say who will be the corresponding author, and suggest reviewers if they ask you to do so. Next, please. Submit to one journal at a time. So this has to be clearly mentioned in the cover letter, because it's not nice to waste their time. You can't be publishing in one paper, submitting to one journal and say that, oh, let's do another journal and see which one comes back quickly. That's not ethically right. Next, please. So this is a sample cover letter. So in my first paragraph, I said that what kind of article am I submitting? This is an original research article. This is a systematic review with meta-analysis. This is a case study, or this is a case report mentioned clearly with the title and for consideration for the publication where. So the novelty of our study, you want to highlight what is your main point and why is this work important. And then, so the number 1 and 2 is my main point, and the next paragraph is why is it important, and the last paragraph is I clarify that this manuscript has not been submitted elsewhere in the similar form, and all authors have contributed significantly to the design, conduct of the study as well as writing of the manuscript, and all authors are aware and agree with this submission. They didn't ask for reviewers, so I didn't suggest reviewers here. Next slide, please. So final copy, make sure you've got all this. I think this was already mentioned earlier, but importantly, please make sure spell check your document. The word count fits the journal requirement. Referencing fits the journal requirement. All the margin, spacing and other formatting requirement must be perfect. Next. Financial disclosures. Some journals require, all journals require you to do this. All sources of financial support and affiliations with companies that represent a potential conflict of interest should be fully disclosed at the time of presentation or publication. I think you know why this needs to be done. And because many drug company will pay for clinical trials to be done by objective clinics or research lab, but this must also be disclosed in any publication or results. Next. Now, the peer review process. So, now considering you have that manuscript, you went through the instruction to author, you formatted it, you registered, make sure all the checklist, insert, cover letter, all done. You have submitted, okay? This is the process after submission. After submission, your manuscript will be checked for completeness by the editorial office. So, this is where they check whether have you followed the whole instruction to author, merely formatting requirements. Then the editorial office will assign an editor. The editor will be someone in the field, and this editor will assign reviewers, typically at minimum 2 reviewers. Next. Peer reviewers are selected by the editors, typically 2 to 3 reviewers, and a peer reviewer is someone who is in your field. He is an expert in your topic or methodology. Next slide, please. The types of peer review. There are many types of peer review. Typically, the identity of the reviewers who evaluate the work is hidden from the author. The author doesn't know who evaluates the work. But most commonly is number 2, double-blind peer review, where both reviewers and authors' identities are hidden from each other. Means, when the editors send the paper to the reviewer, your names are not included because they don't want to introduce any form of bias to their review. And when the reviewer come back to you as authors, you also do know who's their names. You'll be there, just reviewer 1, reviewer 2, and so on. Next. Who makes the decision to accept or reject a manuscript is the editor. So he has the final say. Most editors that receive and review a manuscript are unpaid scientists in the field. The advantage is they know the science and they should have more current knowledge. And the disadvantage is they are busy and they may have their own scientific bias and geographical bias. Means if you are a researcher in India and the editor is someone from the US, he may have his own geographical bias and things like that. But at minimum, usually these editors are scientists in their field and they know what they are doing. Next. So these are the possible outcome after submission. So when you submit an article, straight, that's rejection, no review. That's what we want to avoid. So how do you avoid that? Make sure you fit the journal's aim and scope. Make sure it's a good piece of work. Make sure you format it properly. Okay, let's say we don't do that. Rejected with comments. Well, we all have to face failure. So we just improve and submit elsewhere. The left may resubmit if address comment, means the reviewer came with some comments, so they ask you to address and they want to review it again. You address the comment and resubmit and accept. That's what we want to aim for. Or if they still reject, then you submit to other journal. So when I look at this, I always remember what my supervisor used to say. My PhD supervisor is an excellent supervisor, an excellent writer. And he said his paper was rejected 7 times the first time. So that is like a very good thing for me to hear. So I always tell myself it's fine. Okay, so first rejection is fine. Second rejection is fine. Just be persistent as long as you know you did a good job. Next. So when you receive your review, Prof. Balakumar mentioned briefly, don't be angry with the reviewer. You need to understand they are not paid. They took their own time to review your work with the intention of helping you improving your work. So be thankful to receive comments and recognize the importance of addressing criticism. Also remember, I told you, knowledge is not just constructed in the labs. Knowledge is also constructed through your writing. So maybe you looked at it differently and try to think of how, from the perspective that the person is coming from. And that's where you want to do it. That's how you need to approach their comments. Try to think that comments are equivalent to improvements to your manuscript. It's very heartbreaking, I can tell you. It's really heartbreaking. So when you receive the comment, just read the comment, close, go have an ice cream, movie or whatever, then work on it tomorrow. Okay, the next day. Previous slide, please. So they give you some time. So you can take 1 day off for ice creams, okay? The next slide, please. So I typically see the types of reviewer comments into 4 categories. 1, valid criticism that are easy to address. Just make them happy, even if you disagree. Okay, just make them happy. Address it. Valid criticism that are difficult to address. Then you explain to them why is it difficult. Invalid criticism that you can show invalid. Maybe they missed a point, but you have to be very you have to be very respectful and tactful in addressing them. Matters of opinion, also again invalid because it's their opinion and they cannot be proven. So this one also you have to tactfully address. Next slide, please.
Last 5 minutes.
5 minutes, yeah. So valid criticism that are easy to address. For example, they said, that's the reviewer's comment. When discussing the prevalence of drug use, there was no mention of the prevalence of drug use in males versus females in the 18 to 22-year-old adults. I think this would be useful information. So easy, just include it. Next slide. Valid criticism that are difficult to address. HIV antiretroviral treatment was tested in 65 men and only 28 women with HIV and HCV co-infection in one city. This study should have included equal numbers of men and women in different locations. I can't go and conduct that study again, right? So I address it tactfully. We acknowledge this limitation. However, we believe this study population is representative of the total HIV-HCV population in California. This study was only able to be carried out in one city. You address it, include it in your limitation of that manuscript. Next. Invalid criticism that you can show invalid. Maybe the reviewers say maybe some of the subject had lower amount of HCV viral load because these subjects drank less alcohol. So maybe he missed a point. So you clarify that and say, alcohol consumption was monitored throughout the study. We have further clarified this statement in the method section. Try to say that, no, that's not the case. We have clarified it. Next, please. Not a valid criticism. People infected with both HIV and HCV are not important population to study. He's really just questioning the whole study. So you need to tactfully understand this. Next slide, please. So do you need to do more experiments, do further analysis? There are many times they will ask you to further analyze. If it's just a statistical analysis, to be very honest, it's just some clicks, do it. But if you have to really conduct another set of experiment and you don't have materials in the lab, then you probably have to justify that. Okay. Next. Detailed response. I think this is important. You need to list each reviewer's comment. Again, similar attention should be given as to how you gave attention in preparing the manuscript. Similar. Because when something comes to me, I have already reviewed the manuscript. I don't want to go and review the manuscript again. If you give me a response to reviewer that's very clear, reviewer comment 1, this is my response, this is where you can find it. Reviewer comment 2, this is where my response, this is where you can find it. It makes me very happy. So list each reviewer's comment, point out the page and section of the manuscript that is being discussed, Address each point. If you made a change, show it. Include the new text in your response. If you did not make a change, say why not. Next slide, please. This is an example. So, first, be very thankful for that comment. We would like to thank the reviewers for their time and effort in reviewing our work. We truly appreciate the comments given to improve the manuscript. We have addressed the comments as given below. Reviewer 1, introduction. That was his comment, number 1. Then that was the author's response, and the ones in the paragraph is exactly how we have included in the manuscript. So the person doesn't have to keep going to the manuscript to see whether it's done or not. Next slide, please. Resubmission. Make sure you change the cover letter and resubmit, because now you have resubmitted the paper. State that you have addressed the comments and attach detailed response to reviewers and new version of the manuscript, usually with track changes. Next. If it's rejected, don't give up, just try again until you publish the article. Next slide, please. If you're successful, hopefully that's the case, they'll give you a proof that you can have to quickly approve, but at that time you cannot change or add any data or change any contents of the text. Next slide, please. And before they publish, they will also ask you to sign off an intellectual property, because the IP now lies with that journal, so you have to sign off that. Next slide, please. And with that, I would like to conclude. All the best in your publishing journey. Thank you.